Welcome to Leading for Life Stories Season 4. I'm Bob Judson. I'm the host for this podcast, and thank you very, very much indeed for joining me. Whether you're a new joiner or a seasoned listener, then I really, really hope you enjoy the mix of content that we provide. The personal stories, the thematic episodes, and of course, the fantastic guest interviews. If you've been with me since the beginning, then I'm enormously grateful for your loyalty and thank you so much. If you're relatively new to the show, then I really hope you like it, and I hope you find all of it interesting and some of it hopefully useful to you. Please subscribe on whichever channel it is you're using, whether it's YouTube, whether it's a podcast platform. That really helps us boost the show and get it over the hills on the algorithms. So if you can do that for me, I would be enormously grateful. But without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everyone. My guest this week is a really special one, which I've been looking forward to for some time. Marshal of the Royal Air Force, the Right Honourable, the Lord Jock Stirrup. Knight of the Garter, Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath, and an Air Force Cross to boot. I've known Jock Stirrup pretty much all of my service career. He was my flight commander, so I was a squadron leader when I was going through the Jaguar Conversion Unit, and then subsequently my boss on 2 Squadron when I was there as a Jaguar pilot. I joked some years later when I met him in a bar actually at the Joint Service Defence College at Shrivenham, and I was introducing him to someone else. I said, the Chief Defence Staff at that stage used to be my boss, and he looked at me and said, "I still am your boss, Bob." And he's been a real pivotal figure for me in terms of the Jaguar Force and beyond that. I think, tremendous man as a squadron commander, a tremendous man as a Chief of Defence Staff, and all of the intervening appointments as well. And it comes over in the interview. He's, I think, got an awful lot about him, a huge amount of experience, huge amount of knowledge. It's a really interesting career journey that comes over. And he obviously is very active in the House of Lords these days. He's a crossbencher there. He does all sorts of stuff that I think is very laudable in terms of what he currently puts his interests in and onto, and I have a lot of admiration for him, and I think it was lovely to get him on the show because not least his perspectives around politics, around defence, around his own personal leadership journey are really useful and really, really interesting. It's a great episode, one I've really enjoyed, and I hope you do too. Let's go. Well, my lord, Jock, if I may, it is such a delight to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining. We've known each other for a very long time, right back from when I was going through the Jaguar Conversion Unit. You were a flight commander then, and there's so much to talk about in terms of your journey subsequently. But I'm really grateful. Thank you very much for joining.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, Bob. Thank you for asking me.
Not at all. No, I think, let's just get straight into it. I think many of my viewers / listeners will, particularly the military ones, will know of you. They will know a lot about particularly your later career, but they probably don't have much of a clue about your earlier career and your sort of overall journey. So if you could just sort of put some flesh on the bones and talk us through that, would be terrific.
Well, of course, I joined the Air Force through Cranwell via the old cadet system, and graduated from there in 1970. And after, or rather towards the end of my advanced flying training at Valley, on the good old NAT in those days, we were in the throes of one of the periodic and seemingly never-ending series of backlogs. This particular one was caused by the Air Force buying the Phantom from the United States, having cancelled TSR-2 and then cancelled the F-111, which was supposed to replace it. They bought the Phantom, but they decided, instead of using the engines that were already in it, to put Rolls-Royce engines in, which of course created all sorts of technical difficulties. And so the delivery rates slowed right down, and inevitably there was a huge backlog in the training system. So on the advice of my flying training squadron commander, I elected to go to CFS, which turned out to be a good move as it happened, because I got to the end of my QFI tour not very long after my contemporaries were joining their first squadrons. They spent about 18 months just holding. I didn't have any hold at all. So anyway, I went to CFS and was selected to instruct on the NAT. So after some time at Little Rissenden, flew the NAT out of Kemble, and then came back up to Valley as a QFI. At the end of which I went out to Oman on loan service with the Sultan of Oman's Air Force during the Dhofar War. That was rather a short notice posting because the fellow I was replacing had been shot down and killed. So they needed
Wow.
battle casualty replacement rather urgently. So I went out there and spent the better part of 2 years out in Oman, which is fantastic, great experience, and came back just in time to join the newly emerging Jaguar Force, which you will remember only too well. After a tour on 41 Squadron, I then on exchange to the United States, flying the Phantom there, back to the Jaguar, and thereafter I sort of alternated between command and staff appointments, having commanded 2 Squadron, which you will remember only too well.
Vividly. Yeah.
I was actually in the very fortunate position of having completed my Squadron commander tour without ever having done a ground tour. It was when I was in America on exchange, I was promoted soon after to Squadron soon after arriving there. And when I asked to extend that tour, Barnwood, as it then was, told me well that I could do that, but then that would count as my squadron leader flying tour. So I said, okay. And I was fully expecting to come back to a ground tour. But in the sort of 9 months or so before I was due to come back, all the Bruggen squadrons, you may remember, increased the establishment of squadron leaders from 2 to 3. Another Jaguar squadron leader had unfortunately been killed in an accident. And suddenly there was a great shortage of Jaguar qualified squadron leaders, and I've wound up back on the OCU for another flying tour. So that was great. And then, you know the rest, basically between MOD and various command positions for the rest of my career.
Yeah, all the way to the very top as the Chief of Defence Staff. Fascinating story. I mean, I thought I did pretty well because I got all the way through to being a flight commander without having done a ground tour. But to be a squadron commander and never done a ground tour, that's amazing. I didn't realise that. And you had some extraordinary events along the way there. I mean, can we just pick up on the Dhofar War bit? Because I suspect in the way of the world these days, an awful lot of people will be completely unaware of that. And I knew you were out with what was then Sultan of Oman's Air Force, now Royal Air Force of Oman, isn't it? But the Strike Masters, correct?
Strike Masters and Beavers.
Wow. Oh, that's a contrast and a half, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So tell us a bit more about what was going on there in terms of and the kind of stuff you got into, because it's quite unusual. I mean, you were straight out really just at the end of the flying training system to go out and into kind of active service that quickly. I mean, that's pretty rare, to say the least.
Yes, it was a real eye-opener and tremendous experience, both from the point of view of flying and, of course, from the point of view of close cooperation with the army, because we were flying interdiction, but also close air support. And the people we were supporting on the ground, you would recognize the voice when you were scrambled to provide close air support for them because you'd probably been partying with them the week before. So we all knew. I mean, it was a rather sort of intimate organization, but it was a challenging time because the insurrection in Dhofar was partly inspired and backed by the People's Democratic Republic of the Yemen, as it then was, with essentially Russia pulling the strings. And there was a great deal of concern, and this has great resonance today because you will recall that the northernmost part of Oman, which is not contiguous with the rest of the country, is the southern part of the Straits of Hormuz. And there was great concern that if the communists took over Oman and were controlling the Straits of Hormuz, we'd all be in great trouble.
How history repeats
what
itself.
Goes round comes around.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was a great deal of difficulty in dealing with the insurrection at the back end of the 60s because the Sultan in those days was very medieval in his approach. And it was quite clear, as in so many conflicts, that there was no military solution to this problem. The military could help achieve one, but it had to be a political solution. And the old Sultan was not up for that. He was replaced by his son, Sultan Qaboos, in 1970. And Sultan Qaboos introduced a system of reform and a program of social outreach, of looking at the issues that had concerned a lot of the Dhofaris and dealing with them, but at the same time conducting a very aggressive military campaign. So it's sort of carrot and stick. And that was the situation when I arrived out there. And it was the war was probably just about at its peak when I arrived out there. And the the insurgents were having a hard time, but the Sultan's forces were running out of people as well. And at that stage, the Iranians contributed some forces, which had a significant effect in terms of the overall combat power of the Sultan's forces. And the war itself came to an end about the end of 1975. I left in the middle of 1975, so I was there really sort of peak through to just before the climax, as it were. And so operational experience, experience of jointery, experience of the Middle East. I got to know Oman very well, and was connected with it on and off, quite closely for the rest of my career.
Were you the only loan service officer out there, or were there lots of you?
No, no, no. In those days, all of the pilots in the Air Force were essentially Brits,
Right.
either serving officers on loan service or recently retired officers who were out there on contract. And some people went out there on loan service, left the Air Force and stayed out there on contract. The servicing was all done by civilians, by air work. The army was officered almost entirely by Brits in those days, but the soldiers, the Jundis, were, almost entirely Omanis. In the Air Force, the only Omanis we really had in those days were helicopter crewmen and crewmen on the transport aircraft.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Really interesting. I mean, I remember lots of Jaguar guys going and doing exactly that. Of course, either out on loan service or then going out on contract subsequently when Oman had the Jaguar for lots of years. I mean, I think that the fascinating thing for me as well, looking at that, is in your era at that stage, which is before I joined the Air Force, obviously, the Cold War was in full swing. That's when obviously the vast majority of people were very focused on the frontline side of the Cold War and all that was going on with that. But that operational experience thing was non-existent, really, because you were preparing for something, but you weren't actually doing it. And it was, I remember vividly, when we started doing operations, I missed the first Gulf War. It was actually on my own exchange tour with the Germans at that stage, but came back into the no-fly zone stuff on the Jaguar and doing that over Iraq and then subsequently over Bosnia. And it was fascinating how it changed us in terms of developing our mindset, where we were doing operations where we really hadn't done that before. We'd focused on what might happen and being very prepared and having countless exercises, which, we remember well. But very different. So that must have been a great thing for you, particularly where you subsequently went on to.
It was a wonderful experience. And of course, being shot at concentrates the mind wonderfully.
Surely. Yeah. No, I remember it well when there's sort of black puffy clouds appearing around the airplane. What's that? It was an odd experience. Yeah. Wow. Fantastic. Looping right back much earlier than that. I mean, I tend to always talk with my guests about early motivations and early life. I just wonder if you could give us some insights on your kind of journey towards the Air Force as opposed to once you'd actually started in it.
Well, from pretty much as early an age as I can remember, I wanted to fly. I wanted to fly like a bird, get up there and look down on everyone from above. I mean, I can't really remember a time when I didn't want to do that. I'm sure there was a time when I was 2 or 3, but from almost as far back as I can remember. But even a slow learner like me realized that no matter how hard I flapped my arms, that wasn't going to work. And when I was a small boy in the 1950s, if you thought about flying, you thought about the Air Force. I mean, the Second World War was only just around the corner, and all the famous names, they were still household words. And so I guess at the age of about 8 or 9, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fly in the Air Force, and it happened.
Did you ever look at the commercial side, or was it just Air Force? Did you ever think about the commercial side and the airlines?
No, as I say, in those days, if you thought about flying, you thought about the Air Force. You didn't think about commercial flying. I mean, of course, some people did go into it immediately. But in when I was a small boy in the 1950s, most of the people in commercial airlines were ex-Air Force pilots anyway from the war. So that's how I thought. So no, commercial flying didn't even enter into my mind. So that became my ambition. It remained my ambition, and I was very fortunate that I was able to fulfill it. Not everybody is, of course. I mean, I remember when I went to the first thing I went to was a thing called a test in advance at the Officer and Aircrew Selection.
I did one of those.
Biggin Hill. That was, quite special, going to Biggin Hill. And I remember in the candidates' mess at the end of the first day, I mean, some of them had fallen by the wayside on the medical and aptitude tests and things like that. And, they were absolutely devastated because they'd set their hearts on it. I was fortunate and, got through it, and I went through for the full selection a year or so later and was offered a place at Cranwell.
Yeah, you may be entirely unsurprised by this, but I failed the aptitude the first time. And I got told come back in a year, and I went back in a year for a cadetship, which to get university sponsorship, and I got through, much to my amazement. The challenge I then faced was actually getting the A-levels to go to university, which I didn't slightly less well on, but I don't regret that. I jumped straight to the Air Force straight from school, no degree, and I have no regrets at all about that. It's very interesting what you were saying about holding and the backlogs in the system as well, because that's one of these other things that what goes around comes around, isn't it? Because it is amazing how cyclical that is. I mean, I was incredibly fortunate when I went through, because I went literally from Cranwell to Linton on Ouse with a minimal gap. There are very minimal, a week or something between there and Valley, and a weekend between there and the Tactical Weapons Unit. So, it was extraordinary. The first hold I had was 6 weeks at Abingdon before I went to the Jaguar Conversion Unit. And, whereas contrast that with more recent times where people have been spending literally years in the holding system, which I think must be very demoralizing, very challenging to keep your mojo up when you're in that position, I think.
Well, it's terrible. But of course, the problem is it's such a long pipeline. It's rather like, a great queue of traffic on the motorway. You just need something to happen a little, someone pulling out suddenly far ahead of you, and the whole thing concertinas, doesn't it? And that's essentially what happens in the training system as well. So, decisions are made during a spending review or something like that. Something gets cancelled, something gets cut, something gets delayed. And then the reverberations of that, through that 2, 3, 4 year pipeline can be quite horrendous.
Yeah, I'd be interested in your reflections on this as a total digression as well. That, I mean, one of the things that I think's changed when I joined in 1980, probably about less than half, I would say 40% maybe, had gone through university. And there are a lot of direct entrants, whereas now, of course, it's far, far higher percentage of university graduates, coupled with the fact that they're then often having a gap year, often doing a 4-year degree or a master's or something. And I remember almost the last thing I did in uniform 11 years ago, just before I left, was present wings. And then at Linton, because obviously we'd changed it wasn't Valley anymore, it was going to be done at Linton. But having got my own wings when I was 20, I was then the youngest person I presented wings to that day. Was 26. And that does, I think, present some interesting challenges, doesn't it, for progressing people through the system when you then add in that flying training process and all the rest of it, because it definitely doesn't help.
Yes, but it's even worse than that. I was at Lossiemouth at a 2-squadron dinner 2 or 3 years ago, and you will recall that at that time people were getting onto their first squadron around the age of 30. I mean, at the age of 30, I was just starting my 4th tour as a squadron leader with about 2,000 hours of flying under my belt.
Yeah, very similar.
And it was more than young people today are going to get in a career, of course. But that and the problem with that is that when you and I were on our first squadrons, we were young, we were single, we went off on detachments, we got deployed various places, and it was all great fun. These days, they're operationally extraordinarily busy, far busier than we were, spending even more time away from home. But they've got a wife and a couple of kids as well at that stage, and so it's it was a very difficult and very damaging situation. Unfortunately, the average age of people arriving in the squadron is coming down, which it really needed to, because it was unsustainable.
I agree completely. Yeah, it's fascinating reflections. I mean, the podcast's all about leadership in the main. That's the kind of core theme running through it. I'd just be really interested in your reflections on, as much as anything, your own leadership journey, what you took along the way in terms of the way you shaped, adjusted your own leadership style, what you saw in others, what your reflections on good, bad, and ugly, if you like.
Well, it's interesting. When I graduated from Cranwell in 1970, if you'd asked the senior staff then, who out of my entry was least likely to succeed in the Air Force, I'm not saying I would have come at the top of the list, but I would probably come quite high up it. I mean, in part that was because I've always been a bit of a rebel, and certainly in those days, in the system, you had to conform to get on, and I was a very reluctant conformer. And I suppose it wasn't until really, my mid-20s that I started to think a bit more seriously about, the issues of leadership and so on. I was very lucky when I came back from Oman and went to 41 Squadron, which was just forming with Jaguars. The squadron commander was John Thompson, whom you will remember, a great fellow, good friend, and a very good leader. He was a tremendous example. And there were others on the. My flight commander was Tim Thorne, late and very much lamented, and another great friend. So I had a lot of good examples around me, if you like, and I was able to observe and see what they did. But people say leadership can be taught, and I know what they mean, but I don't. It's not that simple. You can teach principles. You can teach techniques and knacks and things like that. But you can't teach someone to be a good leader, because to be a good leader, I mean, it has to come from within, from who you are and what you are yourself. One of the biggest mistakes people can make is trying to be something or someone they're not.
Mm-hmm.
It never works. So in a sense, everybody has to find their own salvation, as it were. You have to find your own answer to leadership. Of course, there are all sorts of things, as I say, that can help you on that journey, but it's one you've got to make yourself.
No, that makes sense.
And as I say, it's no good. You can look at all these examples and say, oh, well, that was good, but you can't be them. You've got to be yourself. I think that's probably the biggest thing I learned over the years. The other thing that I learned quite early on by observation, and this is this is about command rather than leadership, and that is when you are in command of something, you can't have friends amongst you in your organization. I mean, you can be friendly, you can be affable, you can be charming, but you can't have friends, because if you have friends, then there are other people who aren't your friends, and that's terribly divisive. So, people talk about the loneliness of command, and that's true in a sense, because you can have friends, in other organizations, but within your organization, you can't.
Yeah, fascinating reflections. It's very interesting because I mean, these days, as you know, I do teach leadership stuff to people, but I totally agree with you. I think it's for me, it's all about tools, techniques, tips, ideas, things that have worked, personal experiences, and I'm very transparent about that. That's what I share with people and say, some of this you'll like, some of it you might not like. That's fine. Pick the bits you like and you think you can make use of. Because I do think you have to have your own style, you have to form your own style and build that over time with everything you do. So I'm totally with you. I also get highly amused some of the time with academic leadership, where there are people who are they've written books on it, and but then you interrogate them about it. So what have you actually led? Because of course the practical experience thing is vitally important, and I think one of the things I say to people quite often with the work I do is, when I was fortunate enough, to do some big things, like Kandahar was a great one for me, where leading the base at Kandahar with 25,000 people on it, and all the diversity, the 20 nations, the 170 airplanes, the war zone bit, and everything else that goes with that. The practical experience you get from that, and you will have had that massively more than me in terms of the span of control and the things you did, particularly at the very top of the military. You can't beat that in terms of of experience to then translate into doing something else, because you need to have done that. The theory is great, but the practical experience counts for everything, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I think also that, it's interesting you talk about scale, and it does matter. Leading a small group of people is a very intimate thing. It's very much, person to person. But when you get to larger organizations, of course, you can't do that. And the more senior you become in any organization, really, the more your job becomes to set an overall strategic direction, but to find good people, put them in the right place, and turn them loose.
No, totally. That makes sense. And looking specifically at kind of leadership traits, if you like, what are the things that particularly when you look back at your military time, I suppose, what did you look for in the people that you were wanting to get promoted and wanting to have working directly for you and around you? What sort of specific things were vitally important?
Well, the first thing was, going back to what I said earlier, that I was seeing them themselves. They weren't putting on a facade. They weren't trying to show me something they expected I wanted to see. I wanted to see them and who and what they were, because that has to be at the basis of all good leadership. Secondly, I wanted to see people who were able to keep lots of balls in the air at once, because that's always one of the biggest challenges. I wanted to see people who were cool under fire, in both literally and metaphorically,
Mm.
because that is also crucial. But I want to see people of good judgment, because, I mean, interesting question: was Hitler a good leader?
Mm.
I mean, you got a lot of people to follow him,
He sure did. Yep.
um, but to be a good leader, you've got to get people to follow. You've got to, inspire in them, self-belief and the willingness to do something. But you've also got to lead them in the right direction.
Mm.
No good being able to get everyone to follow you if you're going to take them straight to hell.
Which is very interesting in the current kind of political context as well, which we might come back to in a minute in terms of some of that. I think that's fascinating. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think those are some great examples of important traits. It's a bit of a cliche question, but if you look all the way back to the very start of your career, or even before you joined the Air Force now, and you were providing advice to yourself as a young Jock Stirrup, what would you be saying?
Well, do you mean if I was starting now or I was starting then?
With what you
There's
know
a
now,
big difference, you
well,
see. I mean,
yeah,
you're
that's
talking
true.
to you're talking to, a yesterday's man. I I'm not sure that I would want to be in the Air Force today. Not because
Interesting.
there's
Why
anything
not?
wrong with the Air Force, but because it's different from the Air Force that I knew and loved. But then the Air Force that I knew and loved was different from the Air Force that my predecessors had known and loved. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's absolutely normal. But, we're all products of our own time, aren't we?
Mm.
So, if I was starting today, I don't know what I'd say, because it's all completely different. It's all completely new. If I were, if I were, if I could sort of just give advice to myself back in sort of 1968 or 1970, what would I say? Gosh, I don't know. I'd say anything, Bob, to be perfectly honest. I don't think that I don't think I'd want to change anything.
Interesting. And which takes me neatly into what I always ask about, which is kind of highs and lows, and you've just answered the first part of that. So in terms of not doing stuff differently, but high point of professional high point across your career, what would you
Well,
say
I've
was?
had many. I mean, it's very difficult. It's rather like saying, what's your favorite piece of music or your favorite book? I mean, it depends on how you feel on the day and what mood you're in. Uh, I can say quite unequivocally that my favorite tour in the Air Force was commanding RAF Marham, station
Mhm.
command. Um, and there are a variety of reasons for that. First of all, of course, I was still flying, not operationally, but I was still, doing plenty of flying. And it was great because as well as a wing of Tornadoes, I also had the last squadron of Victor tankers. So I qualified as captain on the Victor, which was fun. But it was the last time I had a command where you could pretty much get your arms around everybody. I mean, I had about 2,500 uniformed people, and so you couldn't know every individual, but you knew lots of them, and you certainly knew all the, the senior NCOs and the officers, and a fair sprinkling of the others as well. We had a great relationship with the local community, and the whole civic side was enormous fun. I mean, it wasn't all fun, of course. It was the first Gulf War, and we had casualties. We lost people, which was very sad. But of course, that's part of the job, isn't it? Being able to deal with that. So that was a fantastic tour, and it's probably the one I enjoyed most. I think I can say that. Lows, I think it's interesting that the sort of low point in my career, in one sense, was the time I spent as personal staff officer to the chief of the air staff. Not because it was a bad job. I mean, it was a great job. It was, and the people I worked for were great. The first one, David Craig. I mean, he's still a friend. Today, still going strong in the House of
I
Lords.
know, amazing. He's doing really well.
97 in September. But in those jobs, you're completely at the mercy of somebody else's diary. You have no freedom whatsoever. And it does become wearing after a time. And I'm really glad I did it, because it taught me an enormous amount. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat, of course, because of that. But it's just one of those jobs that's best seen in the rearview mirror rather than through the windscreen.
Yeah, fantastic. I can remember actually, there's so many sort of similar thoughts in my head because my station commander tour when I had Coningsby, I mean, not only did I have Typhoon and the build-up of Typhoon, but also Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, of course, which, I mean, I never in a wildest dreams did I think I was ever going to do that. So for 2 years flying around as Spitfires and the Hurricanes was just incredible. And then the kind of cap it all bit was when Sixth Squadron moved, my old squadron moved from Coltishall to Coningsby to kind of see out its time on the Jaguar. And I mean, so I got back in the Jaguar as well, which was completely ridiculous, really. So yeah, I totally get that, and I also understand what you mean about getting your arms around it. I think it is definitely one of those things where it's nice to feel you've kind of got a proper grip. I mean, interestingly, on your personal staff officer tour, I was on the back of my squadron commander tour. I was run for being the assistant private secretary to the Secretary of State, which was Jeff Hoon at the time. And I can still remember I got down to the final three, one from each service, and then I think it was the Navy guy got it. But I can still remember Glenn Torpey, who was chief of the air staff at the time, ringing me up and saying, "Do you know what? That's probably the best outcome you could have got.
Congratulations! Yes.
You were the Air Force's guy, but you didn't actually get the job." And so yeah, I could totally see that. There's some of these, the grind of some of these jobs is huge. There's no doubt about that. I think it's really challenging, isn't it?
But you have to. I mean, it doesn't matter what field you're in, what job you do, no matter how glamorous they might seem, they've all got their element of grind to them. You have to, if you don't do that, then you don't succeed.
No, and interestingly, I mean, when I was subsequent to the Air Force at Deloitte, one of the conversations I had quite regularly at Deloitte with senior people there was the system we had in the military, where you had military assistants or personal staff officers who would run your outer office, and in doing so, have complete visibility of absolutely everything that was crossing the principal's desk, get involved in all of those very high level discussions and conversations. And the commercial world tends to see that kind of thing as an overhead. Whereas the reality was, in terms of an experience builder, and you've just said it, in terms of what you then get from it that you take on into your later career, I think it's really, really valuable. And I think it's definitely one of those things that it's a shame that the commercial world doesn't necessarily pick up on it in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's an apprenticeship in many ways.
No, absolutely. I mean, talking of very busy jobs and all the stuff you've done, and you're still very busy and active now, and we'll come and talk about that in a little while. But what do you do to kind of de-stress, unwind, relax? What are your go-to things?
Well, of course, I used to play golf. I didn't play very well, so I'm not sure it was a de-stressing experience. But I haven't. I gave that up 20 years or so ago. I found I was playing about 3 rounds a year, and they turned out to be pretty expensive rounds of golf given the fees.
Number of balls. Yeah.
So I stopped doing it. But I've always been a great reader. I've always loved music, opera, ballet, the theatre, all of those kinds of things. It's one of the reasons why I live in London. I live in London because it's my hometown. I was born here, and all the things I enjoy doing are here. So that's good. And I still do plenty of that.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, and the golf thing. I play golf very badly and very infrequently. In fact, at the most recent Jaguar reunion where I saw you last, that was I think the previous golf match I had was the previous Jaguar reunion, which
Yeah.
is totally ridiculous, but it was fun. Um, okay, so moving on from you individually, I suppose, into some of the kind of broader stuff. I always like to tap into the experience of my guests because they've got hugely varied and fascinating backgrounds. And yours is no different to that. So there's lots of stuff we can talk about and a huge amount of different options, actually. But I wanted to start on a bit of a lighter note, really, because I've never had a Knight of the Garter on the podcast before. And obviously, the highest order of chivalry in the land, second in precedence only to Victoria Cross, George Cross, in terms of when what you wear, etc. And I'd just be fascinated because the public see the Garter procession every year and what goes on, but your perspectives, I suppose, because it's a very very small group, isn't it? 24, I think, total, and personal nomination of the sovereign, etc. Just talk to us a little bit about what that's like and what you do, maybe beyond the obvious.
Well, of course, it's a great privilege. Goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. It's, as you say, by the since George VI, it's been the personal choice of the sovereign of the day. Prior to that, the government did it. Well, I mean, not all the way back to 1348. In 1348, Edward III was very much his personal choice. But at some stage, it sort of moved over to the government. George VI brought it back to the personal purview of the sovereign. And yes, as you say, it's a maximum of 24. At the moment, there are three new Garter Knights who will be installed in 2 or 3 weeks' time on Garter days, and that will take us back up to 23. Then there are also, of course, the members of the royal family who are sort of extra category, as it were. And then there are stranger knights as well, which is sort of overseas knights, and they're mostly members of overseas royal families. But the companions, the basic of the order is always the sovereign, the heir, and 24 companions. That's how it all started. And as I say, it was 1348, Edward III, who was very much into chivalry and fascinated by the mythology of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and all the rest of it, who started it all off. These days, the only formal event is the investiture and installation of new knights on Garter Day, and the Garter Day luncheon, procession, and service itself. So that's once a year, and it's always a great occasion. We have various things that go on at St. George's Chapel at Windsor. St. George's Chapel is the church of the Knights of the Garter. There are actually military knights of Windsor who pray for us every day. Some of us feel we probably need praying for.
I was going to say that's nice of them.
So that's nice. And of course, we all know one another very well and interact outside of those formal occasions as well. So, I mean, that's really the basis of it.
Do you, I mean, when you look at the members, I mean, just the current members, without listing the whole lot, as well as yourself, you've got obviously Sir Tony Blair, you've got John Major, you've got a tremendous amount of experience and talent in that group. Do you leverage that at all in any way, or is that just purely informal and built on the relationships you've got?
It's informal. There's no formal role.
Fascinating. It seems almost like I don't know, it feels a bit like a missed opportunity to me, that when you've got such a great sort of collection of people from a lot of variety. They're not all politicians and military, obviously, and and you just, with the challenges of the time that we're going to come on to in a second, just wonder whether or not pulling more out of that would make sense. But
well, of course, one does interact, but not as a totality, not as a whole group, as subgroups, if you like. So the network exists through the Garter for you to be able to do that. And it does happen, but it happens informally, unofficially, and it's not part of the Garter per se.
You've got a Garter WhatsApp group kind of thing, have you?
I don't do WhatsApp.
Oh, okay. Well, the some equivalent version. I mean, let's take it into the political domain a little bit, because obviously you sit now as an active, very active crossbencher in the House of Lords. I know you take that very seriously. We are clearly, again, goes without saying, definitely living in a turbulent political time, and not just in this country, more widely across the world. We'll come and talk specifically about defense maybe in a minute, but I'm just really interested in your take on all of that. I mean, governments, you look back at 2019 when the Tories won quite a big majority, you would have thought that they would have been in power for ages on the back of that, and they weren't. They were out at the next election. Labour, same in 2024. For all the world, it looks like they might not make it through the next election. And at the same time, you've got the sort of multi-party politics thing growing up. You've got some really polarizing left and right views in all of that, and you have a ringside seat in the middle of this, I suppose, in terms of what's going on in the Lords. Your perspective on where we are, I guess, where we've come from, and perhaps most importantly, where do you think it all goes to?
Well, I think in large part, the root of the difficulties we face lies in the financial crisis of 2007-8 and the economic consequences of that. I do think that they destroyed the faith of a lot of people in the entire socio-economic political model of Western capitalism. And I don't think that anybody has really reinvented that in a way that means something to ordinary people, whatever ordinary people are. I mean, ordinary people as opposed to sort of tech billionaires, for example. I mean, it's interesting that in the last general election in the United States, the most important issue was the economy. Now, the American economy is the only one that's actually been doing all right in recent years, but it just doesn't feel that way to lots and lots of American voters. They don't feel it, they don't see it. And I think that's true more widely, and it's why you're seeing the appeal of extreme groups throughout Western Europe as well as in the United States. Not that they have the answers, but they know the tune, and they sing the song that people recognize, and it's a siren song. So I think until we go through the intellectual exercise of reinventing our whole socio-political economic model in a way that means something to people, in a way that conveys to them that if they stick with the program, their lives will get a bit better and their children's lives will be better, then we'll fail. So we have to do that. Now, some people would say, yes, but that's because we haven't had any economic growth to speak of, and therefore people don't see their real disposable incomes going up. In fact, quite the opposite. And in a sense, that's true as well. But of course, it's a chicken and egg thing, which came first. And I think, the two do rather go together. We are also in a period where the basis of economic growth is changing. And we have to come to grips with that. And it does mean that old sectors will die, old jobs will disappear, and new ones will emerge. And that's always, again, a period of great turmoil. I mean, interestingly, you will have seen, Tony Blair's intervention just today. And I think there's much in that. There has to be a relentless focus on economic growth. The difficulty is that, if you focus on economic growth, it's going to make for some very, very challenging political decisions. And we don't seem to have anyone that's capable of making those kinds of challenging political decisions just at the moment. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm by nature, a long-term optimist and a short-term brutal realist. But just at the moment, my optimism is very long-term. As things stand, I think we're on the road back to 1976, which you're probably too young to remember much about. But in 1976, the Labour government had to go cap in hand to the IMF for a loan because there was a run on the pound, and the balance of payments was totally shot. And the interesting thing was that the moment the IMF loan was approved, it was no longer required because the conditions the IMF set were such that the confidence of the market was restored. But the government by itself was totally incapable of doing those things, kind of spending reductions that were necessary. And I suspect we're headed for the same place again. People say, well, it's very different from the 1970s. And of course, it's true. This is a very different situation. But, arithmetic hasn't changed. And if you keep on, spending well above your income in such an unsustainable way, eventually the system's going to break. So unless something is done quite dramatically to rein in the ballooning benefits bill and the deficit that it's creating, then I think we're in for some very tough times.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting analysis, and I love the long-term optimist, short-term brutal realist, and I can totally equate to that. I think the challenge for me at the moment feels like people have lost a lot of faith. I was going to say all faith, that's probably too strong, but they've lost a lot of faith in politicians, not necessarily politics per se. And particularly amongst a lot of the youngsters, they're looking at this going, it's just the same old, and you perhaps that's fueling to some extent the more extreme ends and the populism side of what's going on. Because I do think there's in some ways, when you look at what Reform is advocating, for example, there's some interesting stuff in there around reform of the NHS, reform of the welfare system in the UK, both of which I think, as you've alluded to, do need reform. The challenge for the mainstream political parties has been, and I think continues to be, that there's just a electoral loser. The moment you turn around and say reform, everyone equates that to cuts, and they're going to turn around and go, well, hang on, we're not going to do that. So, and it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out, even for Reform with their rising popularity. But if I look at I live in East Sussex. I grew up here really since my father died when I was 3, and Mum moved here. Then I've been here, stand fast all the trundling around with the Air Force, and I've been here ever since. And we've moved back in. We rebuilt her house when she died. In my entire life, not my working life, in my entire life, this has been as blue as it gets. You weigh the Conservative vote, don't count it down here. And the last local election, that's blown away. We now have no overall control in either East or West Sussex, but Reform were the largest party in East and equal with the Liberal Democrats in West. And you kind of go, whoa! I mean, it's seriously, it's earthquake proportions in terms of that. And I mean, from your end of the Palace of Westminster, what does it look like looking down into the House of Commons on this? Do you think this is going to get worse before it gets better, or is your long-term optimism going to play out, and it'll be all right? Well, it'll get to the right sort of place.
No, I think it's definitely going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, as I say, my long-term optimism is very long-term at the moment.
Right.
I think it's going to get substantially worse. There are just so many things that need to be done that are, politically challenging. I mean, you mentioned the NHS. My son is a doctor in the NHS. I'm only too well aware of the issues they face and the pressure they're under. But just pouring money in isn't the answer. I mean, the basic problem with the NHS is that it's an ungoverned system. And I mean ungoverned in the scientific sense, not in the control sense. There is very little control over the output because we have this concept that that delivery of health must be based upon need. Delivery of healthcare must be based upon need. I mean, that's crazy. Prioritization, of course, must be based upon need, but the delivery of healthcare must be based upon affordability. I mean, everything has to be based upon affordability. I mean, all of us who run a household know that. And so you have to control the outputs as well as the inputs. You can't run any enterprise if you only control the inputs. And that means choosing what the NHS will not deliver free at the point of delivery, because it can't deliver everything. Now, that's a very, very difficult conversation to have. And when you start making choices, when you start drawing lines, there'll always be terrible cases that fall just the wrong side of a line. We all know that. It's a feature of lines. But there's no other way of doing it. I mean, there just simply isn't. And until people get to grips with that, until politicians get to grips with that, the NHS will always be in dire straits. And the same is true of the benefits bill and all the rest of it. So there are some really, really difficult decisions, and there isn't the political courage to take them on, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. And it's not helped by, obviously, last government was just as bad as this one is currently, where there's sort of internal navel gazing, changing the leader, all that sort of stuff. I think quite rightly people are being very critical of that, and so they should be, because at the end of the day, I don't think it's helpful.
Well, I think the other thing people have to bear in mind, of course, is that you say people have lost faith in politicians, and I mean, I absolutely understand that, but why would anyone want to be a politician? It's a ghastly life. I mean, it's awful. I mean, not just the sort of the hours and all this. You don't get paid that much. But also, I mean, I've seen some of the emails and the social media things that they receive, which
Horrific.
are absolutely toxic.
Mm.
And in some cases, from their own party, you know, not to, not from opponents or anyone like that. So it's just a toxic environment.
No, on the why would you be in politics? I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I was saying just the same to somebody the other day, actually, that I think it was the last job on the planet. I wouldn't want to do it. I think both pay, and also I think private life becoming public property, and the level of intrusion that you get, and the toxicity of that is horrific. And we have to do something to fix that. I mean, otherwise we're going to be in a really difficult place.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a very active debate about social media, full stop, which I think is quite right. But it would be interesting to see, if you can't really put the toothpaste back in the tube to some extent with this. It'd be quite hard to see how they move it forward. Broaden it out a little bit to the international dimension, and focus a little bit more on defence, because I think it's an area I want to pick your experience on. I mean, you've been Chief of the Air Staff, then Chief of the Defence Staff, and obviously a plethora of other appointments underneath that. And you've looked at, and not least, in a prior job, you were also looking at the equipment program for defence, for example, and looking after all of that. So you have seen firsthand some of the challenges that defence faces in the UK and internationally, and I dare say you keep a pretty close eye on that in terms of what's going on at the at the moment. Again, not just in the UK but also overseas, with some of the geopolitical challenges and the alliance tensions, the like of which I've never seen. I mean, I don't think any of us have experienced that in any of our lifetimes, really. And I just, again, I'm interested in your perspective on the state of that, where it goes, what we can do about it that we're not already doing. Where does the debate need to shift to get us to a kind of better place?
Well, I think the first thing is that, given the threats to our peace and security in Europe, it's quite plain that we need to be spending much more on defence and security. And so I think, the target of 3.5% on military power and another 1.5% on wider security issues, which are of themselves extremely important, resilience, social and structural resilience and all the rest of it are crucial. So I think that that was right. I think that 2035 is far too late. And so far, our government hasn't really done anything towards that. I mean, we all keep waiting for some announcement or other, but there's nothing forthcoming. My own view is that we in this country need to be reaching 3% of GDP on defence by the end of this parliament, and 3.5% by the middle of the next parliament, and at the same time increasing spend on resilience and other issues, other security issues. We need a programme to get there. You can't just suddenly leap to 3%, at the end of the parliament. You need phased increases, because at the same time we need to be developing our defence industrial base. Because if you don't do them in lockstep, you'll just drive up defence sector inflation, and you just won't get value for your money. So we need the expansion of the military and the expansion of the defense industrial base to go hand in hand. And by defense industrial base, I don't just mean traditional defense companies. I'm talking about much wider industrial sector, particularly in the high technology industries. And we've seen in Ukraine how important, traditionally civilian facing industries can be to the defense effort. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that we need to end our reliance within NATO on a single source supplier for strategic capabilities. It just doesn't make sense. And this isn't an issue of, an unreliable American administration. I mean, come the day that when they're needed, those strategic capabilities might not be available or be diminished for all sorts of reasons, being employed elsewhere. So, the alliance has to be much more resilient than that. That means that European members of NATO and perhaps Canada as well need to develop alternative sources of those strategic capabilities, most of which are beyond the reach of an individual nation. And that means we need groupings of nations within the alliance to get together to fund, develop, produce, and indeed operate those capabilities and declare them to NATO. And that means, of course, that we need to develop an innovative, agile, and rapidly scalable defense base industrial base within Europe. And again, not just traditional defense companies. And I say scalable because, we all know that should a conflict start, you won't have what you want at the outset, either in nature or in quantity. Something will be different. A lot of the capabilities that Ukraine is using so successfully against Russia today didn't exist 4 years ago. They've developed them, in response to the conditions that emerge in the course of that war. And the same has been true in every conflict in history. So we need the industrial base to be agile and innovative, but we need it to be rapidly scalable. We need them to suddenly ramp up from producing dozens of things to producing thousands of things. So, that's all part of the challenge. That's where we need to go on defense. Now, some members of NATO are stepping up. Germany is really increasing its expenditure quite dramatically, although it has some serious problems because it does not have the available manpower or the available numbers of people, I should say, to be able to do all that it wants to do. Poland is doing very well. And of course, the Nordic and the Baltic states, being close to the border with Russia, concentrates the mind wonderfully, it seems. So those are the steps we've got to take. That requires, very strong political leadership. And in this country, it requires a shift of resources back from social spending to defense. Over the last 30 years, it's all gone in one direction. Some of it now needs to come back.
Mm. Yeah, and therein lies the challenge, doesn't it? I think there's some really interesting points in what you said, and I'll come to the societal one first, if I may. I mean, I think having been in Germany, obviously in RAF Germany in the Cold War, but then also on exchange with the Germans, I remember vividly when I'd arrived on German Air Force Bremgarten in September of 1989. And of course, the wall came down, Berlin Wall came down in November. And I remember being in the bar that night. We'd been night flying, and some of my colleagues coming in and saying, they're sitting on the wall. And this was such a huge moment for Germany that obviously sparked then the end of the Soviet Union and reunification of Germany, et cetera, et cetera. But the fascinating thing right through my tour was not one, and I do mean not one, of the guys, and they were all guys that I was serving with on a German squadron, would have ever gone downtown Freiburg and been proud of the fact they were in the Air Force. Because there's so much legacy of Germany from days gone past and the Nazi era, etc. And I think to your point about manpower, I think one of the really interesting challenges they face is getting past that, because I think that is, it's times have changed clearly, and it's a long way back to 1989, but I think that is still a problem. And I think in this country, we are light years away from where we need to be in getting society as a whole to think this is a problem. And that, when you get to we need to give up some spending on social spending in order to put more funding into defense spending, and you then get to politicians who are, about where's my next vote coming from. These are difficult circles to square, are they not?
They're extraordinarily difficult challenges, but if one's political leaders aren't up to the difficult decisions, in dangerous times, what's the point of them?
Yeah.
They weren't drafted into the positions of authority they hold. They sought them with all their might and main. Well, they've got them now, and it's their responsibility to lead.
Yeah, interestingly, I did a LinkedIn post not very long ago about this, about leaders are paid to lead and leaders are paid to decide. Again, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's and there's, for me, it feels like it's a gross generalization, but it's appropriate. I think that far too many leaders in lots of organizations, including some of the commercial ones, are looking for consensus where there isn't consensus to be had, and they're totally afraid of turning around and actually taking difficult decisions and pushing a point which might be unpopular, but actually is the right thing to do.
Well, the philosopher Boetius, in his book The Consolation of Philosophy, wrote that if you spread your sails to catch the prevailing wind, you must go where the wind takes you, not where you need to go.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we could debate this for a long time, and I'm very conscious of your time. You've been very generous with it. I have two questions that I always ask on my podcast. The first one is, what's the most memorable event of your professional life? Single event.
Well, you asked professional life, because the most memorable event is undoubtedly my marriage and my birth of my son. So they're the most memorable events of my life. They trump everything else. Most memorable event of my professional life? Oh gosh, I mean, I honestly don't think I can answer that question, Bob, because there are just so many. That spring to mind. I go back to what I said earlier. What's your favorite piece of music, or what's your favorite book, or I can't pick one. I've got so many. I've been very lucky in that I've had a lot of highlights. My highlight reel would be very long.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Having been CDS, but go on, I'm going to push you. You've got to pick one. There must be one thing that would immediately leap to mind as really special.
Oh gosh. I think probably when I was on the Jaguar AOC, you may remember I was awarded the Air Force Cross.
I do remember.
And going to it was my first time in Buckingham Palace, which of course is always a great thing for anyone. Despite what Kenneth Clark, the art historian Kenneth Clark, not the politician, wrote about his first visit to Buckingham Palace in the 1930s. I think he wrote, it was like a bad station hotel with the pictures execrably hung. But that was the first time I shook hands with my sovereign. It was a rather precarious occasion because, they tell you you'll go in and, she'll pin the medal on you, she'll say a few words, and then she'll shake hands and she'll just give you a nudge back to remind you to take a step back and bow. Well, she engaged me in, for an investiture, quite a lengthy conversation about the circumstances of the AOC. And which is all very, very nice and very interesting. But I'd forgotten all the instructions. So when she took my hand and gave me the nudge backwards, I nearly went A over T backwards under my sovereign, which would have been a marvelous first experience. But I suppose that first occasion when I met the Queen and was in Buckingham Palace, I obviously got to know quite a lot after and saw many, many times thereafter. But that was very special. So that's one I would pick out. There are many others.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure. Interestingly, we didn't talk about that because I remember vividly that, and I've spoken about this to a few people over time in sort of private settings where your AFC for doing what you did is what Air Force Crosses should be awarded for. I mean, the bit of background here is serious bird strike. You were in the back seat. Your student in the front was pretty much incapacitated in the front of the airplane. You would have been entirely justified in ejecting from that aircraft, but the Jaguar has no command eject. So, and as I recall the story, you landed at Lucas. One engine was out, and the Jaguar's performance on one engine is not great at the best of times, but the other engine was not doing terribly well either, and you managed to get it down. I think I've never heard of a more justified Air Force cross than yours. So I can imagine.
I always said to everyone, Bob, that it was just like a simulator ride. We used to complain that simulator rides were so unrealistic because they just throw one thing after another at you. But actually, it's just what it was like. So thank heavens for the simulator.
Yeah, well, that's true too, and well done you. I mean, it was a great outcome from a nasty incident for sure. Very last question then. What's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
The most difficult question I've ever been asked is, what was the real high point of your career?
Actually, usually I get people coming back saying that's the most difficult question, is asking me what the most difficult question is. But yeah, I can imagine from a former chief of defence staff, with all that you've achieved and continue to achieve, frankly, you would have a great many high points, and I can easily see that. I'm enormously grateful to you. It's been a good, terrific conversation. I appreciate your time is precious, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very, very much indeed.
It's been a great pleasure, Bob.
Absolute pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye. I really hope you've enjoyed this great interview with Jock Stirrup. He was terrific to talk to, and so many terrific insights and terrific inputs to what I think was a fascinating interview. I hope you found the same. If you did, please share it, please repost it, please like it, please comment on it, do all those normal things. If you really found it valuable, then please think about the financial support element of the podcast. So support the show, link in the show notes, and you can go to patreon.com and become a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show, and you'll really help me out with what I'm trying to do with the podcast as a whole. So that would be great if you don't mind doing that. Either way, I'm very grateful for you listening. Thank you very, very much indeed, and see you soon. Bye now.